Hello everyone, this is a screencast for Module 2 that is all about the beginnings of our understandings on the 9 elements of digital citizenship. As you can see from this graphic, the 9 elements of digital citizenship have to do with digital security, digital access, digital literacy, digital etiquette, digital health and wellness, digital commerce, digital communication, digital rights and responsibilities, and digital law. This particular screencast is not going to go into the specifics of each one of these elements. That's going to be your job. Your job will be that at the end of this screencast you will have selected which one of these elements you are going to be responsible for, and the way that you're going to share your knowledge and information with the class is through what is called a voice thread. So I'm going to present a PowerPoint that will lay out the groundwork for the need for digital citizenship. It also lays out the groundwork for something that Ribble calls the digital citizenship framework, which is made up of these 4 areas: awareness, understanding, action, and deliberation. And then we'll come back to this area of it where we're talking about the way that you will do your voice thread. And I will show you how to do a voice thread. So when we talk about the framework for teaching digital citizenship, which was developed by Mike Ribble, who is the author of your textbook, the idea is how do we get our heads around the various aspects of what it's like to live in this digital world that we live in. So let me take you through this very simple PowerPoint and help you understand where he's coming from. So here's the simple questions. How do we determine what is considered appropriate and what is not in the use of this digital life that we live in? And if we have trouble determining what is appropriate, how will our children and students make that determination? And will our definition of what is appropriate change over time or in the next generation? You can see this already, this change over time in the way that people use cell phones. At one time, taking your cell phone out when you're out with a group of your friends and using it was considered passé. You didn't do it. Now, no one blinks an eye when someone is on their phone. And in fact, if you go to dinner in a restaurant, you can spot whole families all sitting around the table with their various devices out, and there's very little interaction going on. So we see that technology always drives change in our society. Ribble's point is, can we determine whether what we see is appropriate and what is not? And then how do we determine that? So the first step of this awareness is that we have to have the knowledge of the technology and how it affects others and ourselves. And what this simply means is, what's the definition? If someone says, what is digital law? You can tell them, well, the digital law is the ideas and the implications of digital law as it impacts our digital life. So copyright comes into play, the use of materials that do not belong to you, pirating, the idea that it's so simple to go out and just take things from the web without giving proper recognition to whoever created. So if we know the definition, then we can have an idea of what is appropriate and what is not. We also then can look upon what we're doing in light of now having this new knowledge as to whether what I'm doing is appropriate or not. And can I differentiate which one of my actions are considered use or misuse? And am I aware of the implications when I'm using technology? So that's awareness. Pretty simply put, it's the definition. Understanding. Now that we have a definition of what it is, do we understand its use that could be considered appropriate or inappropriate? In other words, what are all the parameters of this particular area? And once we have that awareness, then we can start making statements about what do we see would be the appropriate use and the inappropriate use around digital citizenship areas. Let's look at digital commerce. Digital commerce, if we were looking for the awareness, is simply the use of technology in the buying and selling of goods online. Our understanding then would be that it's very, very simple now to purchase things online. And that can lead to inappropriate use of online purchases. We have seen this in the Apple App Store, where at one point all you had to do was go into the Apple App Store and purchase a app and download it to your phone or tablet. And what was happening was parents who had set up accounts had no way of being able to control that account, and kids were going in and essentially just tapping, downloading, tapping, downloading, tapping, downloading. And you heard the horror stories about people who would suddenly realize that they had a $500 app store bill from where their children had just indiscriminately gone in and purchased things. Apple changed that with the use now. Anytime you go in to use the iTunes or the App Store, you have to put in a separate code or password to be able to purchase anything. And what's even gotten better is their use of their fingerprint recognition on their phones is you literally have to put your fingerprint into the phone, and then if you want to purchase something, you have to place your finger on the home button of your device, and then it will recognize it and make the purchase, which means there's no way you can get around that one. Other phone manufacturers, of course, are following suit with this, and that's Samsung, etc., LG. It's one of those things where, again, as we see, this is such a classic example of digital citizenship, because here we have the ability to do amazing things, purchase things online very simply. But at the same time, then, what we see happening is the use of that technology to do that then gets abused. And so we have an understanding that there are times when technology use is done correctly, and there are times when technology use is done incorrectly. And so now that we understand the definition and we understand the understandings, in other words, what are the parameters around the ideas of digital citizenship, now we can apply the correct action. So again, let's go back to another example. If we look at something like digital health and wellness, the definition of digital health and wellness is the appropriate use of technology in a way that is healthy and leads to a better experience with technology and our regular lives. Understanding that, what we see is that a lot of times people spend an inordinate amount of time sitting in front of a computer screen, or more commonly a game screen, a television, playing games over and over and over again. And they lose touch with time, they lose touch even with reality in terms of social outreach and spending time with their families and friends. Another one that you see, it isn't as prevalent a concern as it used to be, and again, this is a classic example of how digital citizenship and technology changes. We used to worry a lot about how people sat in front of devices, so people sitting appropriately in front of their computer screens while they were typing. Carpal tunnel syndrome, although real and although still very much a concern, what health and wellness has really sort of revolved around lately is this idea about spending way too much time online. And as a part of what we'll do in class is you'll see that we will take a test to find out if you're spending way too much time online. So now that we have a definition and we have the understandings, we have the parameters of how it works, so what would be the correct actions? We would not want to sit for hours in front of the computer playing Minecraft. We would not want to sit for hours on our own playing Call of Duty. But then the argument could be made that if you're doing that in a social setting, why not? And I think what it comes down to is that we realize that digital citizenship, like anything, has its gray areas. And as we move into this new world of virtual reality, as demonstrated by Microsoft this week, what we'll see is people will be able to wear a simple goggles and be able to participate in a virtual world. Now, if that virtual world has them up and running or interfacing, will that be an appropriate way for people to interact with technology that gives them the kind of physical exercise that sitting in front of a screen all day would not? We'll have to wait and see how that turns out. So we have now the areas. So we have an awareness, which is the definition. What does it mean? We have an understanding, the parameters of what the digital citizenship element takes in. We now have an action, which is basically what is it that we need to do and what is it that we need to help others understand about what we need to do. And then finally, we have an evaluation piece. Now, Ribble has changed the name of this several times. He's now calling it deliberation, evaluation. It has the same meaning, though. It is thinking about how technology was used and determining if it was appropriate. Would it be difficult to go back and think about one's actions after they occurred? It is a necessary part of the process to decide if the user was correct or not. In other words, it's all about self-reflection. What did I do? Was it the right thing that I did? Am I satisfied with what I did? And did I do it in a way that positively affects others? So let's look at an example here. This one is one that we're all very familiar with. Lisa gets a cell phone. She feels out of touch with her friends because they all have cell phones and she doesn't. Lisa's parents are concerned about their daughter using the cell phone responsibly. And as it goes on to say, the examples here are talking loudly in public, taking pictures without people's permissions. We all know that, and of course, the big no-no, which is driving a car while using a cell phone. But now, we have to deal with the whole Instagram. We have to deal with people sexting. We have to deal with people being bullied. And so, after careful thought, Lisa's parents decide to buy her a cell phone for her upcoming 16th birthday. Yay, Lisa. Lisa gets a cell phone and a car on the same day. Isn't that nice? Well, what I find so interesting about this is most parents are making this decision about cell phones at a much younger age for their children. So Lisa and her parents have a long conversation about how they could expect her to use the phone. Her parents ask her to follow the 4-stage learning framework. Really? Do you think they did? Engage in digital reflection before using your cell phone on a regular basis. And there she is with her little tiny cell phone. So after getting the cell phone, Lisa's parents sit down and talk with her about how to use the cell phone. And if you think about this, what we're really talking about here is economics, especially if the parents have a cell phone plan that has data caps, etc. And they talk to Lisa about what her boundaries are in terms of the data usage, what her boundaries are, and what she can use the cell phone for. I don't know if there is in this day and age, if we're really doing much with manners with cell phones. I think one of the things that we do have discussions around still is the appropriateness of pictures taken with your cell phone. And as you can see, we need to talk about what are the appropriate uses of using the cell phone. Now, what we have here is we're seeing that the next part of this, where they want her to find out if she can take it to school, this is another area that is really taken off here just recently. Kids are being allowed to bring their phones into schools. I can remember very clearly the day that I had to go pick up my son. Now that was an example of digital citizenship. I had a phone call that came in while I was sitting here recording this screencast. What was my understandings? Well, my understandings are if I were to take the phone call, it would interrupt what I'm doing for you. And would that be fair to you? Looking though at my phone, I could see the name of the person who was calling, and that is a name of someone that is important to me. And so at that point, I realized I needed to take that phone call. And so what would have been appropriate at that point was that I pause the screencast so that you wouldn't have to sit here and listen to me have a conversation on the phone. But how many times have you had that happen? Where you're sitting with someone and you're in a small social circle, maybe just the two of you, and all of a sudden your friend gets a phone call. How about this scenario? Because most of you are still single, you're on a date with someone, and your date gets a phone call right in the middle of your date. If that person were to answer the phone, what would your reaction be? So as you can see, digital citizenship and this framework surround us daily. It's not something that is done in isolation. This is not something that is so esoteric that we don't know about it and we don't have it impact our very lives every single day. It's fascinating. And so Lisa with her phone has to go through this same process of understanding what the parameters are. She goes through the same process of awareness. What is the definition of all the things that have to do with using her cell phone? And when you look at this through a single lens of, say, using a cell phone, awareness really becomes more a definitions of cell phoneness, if I can use that term. What's a data plan? What's a data cap? What is the appropriate ways to use the phone when I'm out of the coverage area? In other words, roaming charges. There's so much that you have to understand about the use of technology that just because we have a definition, we have to understand its parameters and what are all the different implications. And then finally, we have to make some choices. If you are using your phone and you get a message that says that you've left the area of coverage by your provider, and it happens all the time here in Louisville, do you just stop using the phone until you come back into an area that is covered, or do you allow for the charges? And now with that, then we come to this reflection piece of, are we comfortable with the choices that we've made? Now, we don't go as far as Lisa here in keeping a short diary dealing with cell phone use, but we do keep in our brain a little diary where we're basically saying, well, I really, really needed to make that phone call, and I was in an area where my service wasn't available, so I went ahead and used the phone knowing I was going to get service charges. I'll just do it this one time. But then you find that you're doing it more and more and more. And of course, the impact is on your cell phone bill. So let's look at some of these issues. And these are issues that we can look at that might frame how you will be looking at your voice thread. Ribble uses something he calls the digital compass. And so let's put out some ideas here. Your school votes to allow students to BYOD, bring your own device. Teachers are allowed to decide how the students will use their devices. Would you allow students to use their device in your class? Think about it in terms of awareness, definitions. In other words, what does it mean to use the phone in my class? Think about the understanding. What are the parameters then for use of the phone in my class? Think about the actions. What are the appropriate ways to use the phone in my class? What are the inappropriate ways? And what will be the consequences? And then finally, evaluation, deliberation. Remember, he uses those two terms interchangeably. Would we have a chance for kids to think about phone use in the class? And how do they see that they are using it appropriately, inappropriately? And what are the benefits of phone use in class? Here's one that's extremely normal. Just happened. Your friend always calls you when you're doing something else, like ordering lunch, shopping, talking to others, and still trying to talk to you. Are you okay with this? Are we okay with this? Are we okay with being in a group of people and having phone calls come in? Are we okay with the other person taking the phone call? Are we okay with us taking the phone call? This one's real. This actually happened. A student did go on to a Facebook page created by a principal and complain about what the principal had done was stupid. By the way, it's spelled wrong. I see that a policy of the principal. Sorry about that. As a principal suspends the kid. Should the principal have suspended that kid? Goodness gracious, think of all of the implications of that. Not just digital citizenship, but free speech. And what was the intent of the Facebook page by the principal inviting students to share their ideas about the school? And was the principal in the right then for suspending a student who actually did do something like that? This is a classic digital access one. And we're seeing this more and more due to the fact that we see teachers becoming more and more comfortable with the use of technology that can then have a presence outside of class. And you're going to see some of these technologies. Something we call, what I'm sitting here doing right now, screencasting, where teachers are actually creating small screencasts. When I say small, 5 to 10 minutes long, that basically encapsulate what they've taught that day in class for students. They also use it as a way of setting up a formative assessment. We see teachers using tools like Nearpod that are online presentation tools, again, that allow teachers to share with their students what they're doing. What do we do with a student who doesn't have digital access? It's not as unusual a thing as we might think. Here's another one torn from the pages of reality. What do you do with a Twitter account that you allow students to communicate questions? This could be an Edmodo account. This could be a Schoology account. This could be today's Meet account. In other words, all these things that allow for what is called back channeling, where people can have conversations about the classroom. What do you do when you see students putting out misinformation? How do you respond? You hear from someone that students create a bogus Facebook page named after school. What do you do? Again, this is reality. This actually did happen. What would your response be? Again, torn from reality. What would you do if you found out that your significant other or your spouse is using the Amazon because it's so easy to hit that send or buy? Another one that is truly real. Playing Minecraft all the time with your friends who live far away, and your significant other complains you're not involved with them anymore. And I think we all have had experience with this one. Every one of us at some point in time have come across the decision about whether to use copyrighted material that you have not purchased. It's a very difficult decision to make. This one is interesting. As you can see, it goes to the idea that once children are on school property, you as a teacher become what is known in the law as in loco parentis. In other words, you're the parent because they're in your care in that place. But what do you do if something like this was discovered, but it isn't during the school hours? How would you handle it? Finally, this is where you get to decide which one of these areas are you going to become responsible for teaching the entire class about digital access, digital literacy, digital rights and responsibilities, digital commerce, digital etiquette, digital health and wellness, digital communication, digital law, digital security. I hope that by the time you see this, you will have looked at Chapter 2 in your book and decided which one of these you are most curious about. Now, in the class, the actual physical face-to-face class on Monday night, people will be coming up to the computer in the front of the class and they'll actually be putting their name in one of these boxes. We can have as many as 2 people per digital citizenship element. Mostly what we'll have is, because of the size of our class, as you can see we have 9 elements, and I think we have 14 people that we will be able to have. A few that might have 2, most will have 1. If you want to work with someone who is in your situation, in other words, you and another student might be people who are watching this in a asynchronous manner, that would be fine with me. just communicate via email with me which one of these particular ones you want to use. Okay, I'm going to pause the screencast again while I move to our tool that we're going to be using to create it. Be right back.